As US President Donald Trump welcomes UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at his Scottish resorts, diplomacy and geopolitics unfold in Trump's golf course. Starmer arrives with urgent priorities: push for a ceasefire in Gaza, secure a trade breakthrough, and keep Trump engaged on Ukraine. But the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, with mass starvation, siege, and the occupation army's continued assault, threatens to overshadow everything else. Can Starmer persuade Trump to intervene and pressure Israel? Will the UK-US trade deal finally move forward? And how does this informal summit shape the future of British foreign policy? I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Welcome to In Depth. The New York Times has reported that Trump is hosting British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at his golf resorts in Scotland for a day of talks focused on Gaza, Ukraine and trade. The unusual setting, with Trump playing host on UK soil, raises questions on the president's preference for controlling the optics. The two leaders are discussing the worsening hunger in Gaza, with Trump contradicting Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's claim that there is no starvation, saying that the children in images circulating media in recent days look very hungry. Trump pledged more aid and recently approved $30 million for controversial Gaza aid system managed by U.S. contractors and backed by Israel. On Ukraine, Trump voiced frustration with President Putin's continued attacks and said that he might shorten his 50-day deadline for ending the war. The talks, however, also is covering the transatlantic trade tensions, including Trump's new tariff deal with the EU and ongoing disputes over British steel and aluminum. Meanwhile, Starmer, under domestic pressure, echoed criticism of Israel's military escalation and emphasized his government's tougher stance on immigration. The Political reports that Starmer's meeting with Trump in Scotland during Trump's golf resort visit is aiming to secure key diplomatic wins despite the informal setting. According to Politico, Starmer sought to strengthen his personal rapport with Trump while pushing for progress on several pressing issues. His top priorities included advancing the stalled UK-US trade deal, particularly lifting tariffs on British steel and goods, and ensuring Trump's continued support for NATO and the AUKUS submarine alliance. He also planned to press Trump to deliver on his Ukraine aid pledges, including stalled Patriot missile transfers. The worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza is also expected to feature prominently, with Starmer under pressure to take a firmer line on Israel's blockade and military campaign. Despite growing calls within his own Labour Party to recognize Palestine, Starmer has not joined France in doing so. The meeting is viewed as a staging ground ahead of Trump's full state visit to the UK in September. And for more analysis, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Peter Roth, contributing editor at the Newsweek, and from London by Adil Darwish, UK parliamentary correspondent. Welcome to Qnews. I will start with you, Mr. Roth. A very good day to you. Now, Trump is hosting Prime Minister Starmer at his private resort in Scotland, echoing prior meetings with other world leaders. What message is Trump sending by choosing the venue? Does it blur the line between diplomacy and personal branding?
Good day. It's good to be with you. It doesn't blur the line. It underscores how unpopular Prime Minister Starmer is with the British people. He's coming to Trump. Trump's not coming to him. Gee, Mr. President, you were in the neighborhood, and I thought I'd drop in hat in hand to ask you to please not to go see Nigel Farage and boost the prospects for the Reform Party getting the most seats in Parliament at the next election because I've done such a terrible job with the British economy. That's what it says.
Okay. Now, Mr. Darwish, after months of maintaining a working relationship with President Trump, Keir Starmer now faces perhaps his toughest challenge, influencing Trump's stance on Gaza. In your own opinion, does Starmer have any real leverage over Trump, especially given that Gaza remains a low priority for the White House?
Yes, well, I just very quickly, I quite agree actually with my colleague in Washington. And in fact, it actually got worse because when he was asked about Nigel Farage, and President Trump not only praised him, but he asked people to vote for whoever is going to cut taxes, keep you out of work, keep you safe, which is actually Nigel Farage's policy. That is actually linking that to your question. I think it's the advantage that Starmer have got a personal soft touch, not just because of him personally, but because of Trump is half Scottish and he loves this country, loves it so much, loves the royal family, and he repeated that a few times. Secondly, on that personal touch, I think what's more important, that the president actually get affected as a human being by personal story. He mentioned about the hostage family going to see him. He mentioned about the children, saw them on TV. And I think that's probably have more effect. And most probably Starmer, being a lawyer, will actually go from this entry to appeal emotionally to the good side of Mr. Trump, who actually would pressurize Bibi Netanyahu. And as we have seen already, the aid started going into Gaza. Even the Israelis themselves are dropping pallets of aid there.
Mr. Roth, this is Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Prime Minister Starmer. From Washington's perspective, does Trump view him as a reliable partner or not?
I think Trump and his administration view the Prime Minister as reliable a partner a desperate man can be. Starmer's so far down in the polls. The British Labour Party is so far down in the polls that they will take a lifeline from anyone who will throw it to them. This is where Donald Trump excels. He's negotiating a desperate man. And so
yes,
it would, anything is on the table. Starmer needs that lifeline so much to avoid having Labor wiped out at the next election that anything he gets from Trump, a trade agreement, mutual cooperation on defense, agreement to let the Brits play a greater role in the distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza, anything that improves Starmer's position in the polls and causes people to look beyond his mismanagement of the British economy. This is not something that can be fixed by replacing the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's a failure of vision. It's a failure on the macro policy level. If Labour was not so tightly controlled, there would have been a vote of no confidence and an election called.
But do you think that Trump himself is aware of this fact, that he wouldn't sacrifice anything, he would provide or offer the least possible type of agreement because he knows that Starmer is that desperate?
No, this is the time where Trump will get the best deal he possibly can. Trump will, from Starmer, whatever.
Yeah, what I mean by less for the British, not for the United States.
It might, a deal might hurt Starmer with Labor in that certainly with the radical fringe who think that Trump is the devil. But for the moderate working class British voter, the kind of voter who's looking at Nigel Farage as a serious person, a deal with Trump takes some of the hard left edge off Starmer. Getting a deal with Trump, no matter what it is helpful. And Trump knows that instinctively. And so he will pounce and he will get the best out of Britain that Starmer has to offer up, because this is what Trump knows how to do. It's like buying distressed real estate.
Mr. Darish, now, Starmer told Trump that the people of Gaza face an absolute catastrophe and that he is revolted by the images of hunger and starvation, while Trump responded by pledging to send more aid to Gaza and complained about not receiving enough thanks. This is what we heard yesterday, and he also confirmed the starvation in Gaza despite Netanyahu's denial. How do you interpret this dynamic?
Well, I think, what's noticeable is that President Trump tend to agree with Starmer on the need to send aid to Gaza. And on the airdrops, he said, oh, you Brits have been doing it for 100 years, you do it quite well. So he didn't really contradict him, which is quite sort of remarkable that President Trump usually contradicts other people in public. So he didn't contradict him, and he actually agreed with him that there will be no place for Hamas in the future, settlement and so on. I think the issue of recognizing a Palestinian state was not raised, well, publicly at least, between the two leaders, but that we raised it a lot with Nadia Street this morning, and again, still very much sort of question of timing, question of when, no question of if. So in general, in Gaza, I think there's a more close sort of eye-to-eye coordination between the president and the prime minister than any other subject.
Mr. Roth, now Trump recently struck a major economic deal with the EU. Does this tilt U.S. priorities away from the UK and dilute their so-called special relationship?
No, I think it, again, provides an opportunity for a deal. Starmer does a better deal with Trump than the EU did with Trump. Lower tariffs, more investment, more purchase of U.S. goods and services. That will get Trump to sing his praises. That will be good for the United States. That will be good for Britain. But I want to get back to the discussion of Gaza for just a moment, because it is important, and it's on the minds of many Americans, and it's in the minds of President Trump. Now, the official position of the U.S. government is that the aid is being intercepted by Hamas, and that Hamas is the problem here. I look at the pictures and remember that Hamas is the source for many of those pictures. And so I'm not sure we're getting an accurate picture of what's going on. I'm not saying there's no problem in Gaza. There absolutely is, and it needs to be addressed. But what I ought to see, rather than people pounding on Israel to let the aid in, or pounding on the Americans to let the aid in, I'd like to see the world pounding on Hamas to make sure the aid is getting in.
Well, this is the role of the United Nations, Mr. Roth, and that's exactly why Israel eliminated the UNRWA from being in Gaza. This is exactly the role of the United Nations, represented by the UNRWA.
I don't want to see the United Nations debate it in Turtle Bay in New York. I want to see them show up.
The United Nations is the official international body assigned to do this humanitarian relief.
What I am saying is if this is as bad as we are being told it is offense against man and God. And the United Nations ought to be showing up with trucks and helicopters full of food, forget the blockades, go around them, go under them, go over them.
Well, let's not forget that Israel killed UN staff in Gaza, hundreds of UN officials in Gaza.
It's their job. I don't care about the UN officials. I want to see helicopters full of food flying over the border between Israel and Gaza and landing.
Yes, but I want to go back to my point and go back. I'm focusing on the UK-US relations at this point. So I go back to Mr. Darish. Now, Starmer has recalled his cabinet for an emergency meeting on Gaza. So sources say that he is horrified by the images of starvation. What concrete measures can be done and can be realistically expected from the UK government after this meeting beyond symbolic language?
You mean our cabinet meeting, which will happen sometime later this week? it hasn't actually come out yet which day. Remember that the parliament is on a holiday and all the ministers are parliamentarians are on a holiday, so actually getting it back together. It probably will happen towards the end of the week, maybe a Thursday or so. And I think that is just not to change the decision, but I think it's just to get all of Labour front bench to speak with one voice, because there's some kind of rebellious, not quite rebellious, but kind of out of tune. Some of the ministers have already spoken about recognizing the state of Palestine now and so on. I think just getting them to speak with one voice. But in general, I think going back to the telephone calls that the Prime Minister had with the leaders of France and Germany over the weekend, they just want to come out with some kind of a plan. There was actually, in this briefing this morning with the Prime Minister, people in Downing Street, they were just talking about making a plan and just putting it past President Trump, at least he would not oppose it, and then perhaps presenting this plan later on. And also two of the ministers, including the Foreign Secretary, will be attending the United Nations France-Saudi Arabia conference in New York. So most important here that Prime Minister will explain that whatever we do, we must never be out of step with the United States of America. We must work with the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Rauf, to the point again, despite warm rhetoric, the U.S. has yet to lift tariffs on British steel and aluminum. How will they navigate this issue? And is Washington leveraging these tariffs as a bargaining chip?
There's no movement on this. I think it's foolish policy, but the president has been very clear that the aluminum and steel tariffs are here to stay. He is trying to protect the American metals manufacturing industry from imports from China, imports from South Korea, imports from Canada, and he's not really concerned about the effect that it's going to have on domestic steel manufacturers, who have told me privately that they're very concerned that these tariffs are actually going to be counterproductive, that they will be damaging to U.S.-based steel production, that they will not, in fact, help U.S.-based steel production. And so, this is a place where the president and I disagree, but I don't think there's any movement on his part on tariffs on those two issues.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dawish, despite growing public and parliamentary pressure, as discussed, the UK has not yet recognized a Palestinian state, unlike France, and Starmer says that such a step would only be meaningful if a ceasefire is in place. Do you agree with this conditional approach, or is the UK missing a chance to take the moral lead?
Well, I'm not an elected politician to agree or disagree. I just want to explain the position here. Number one, there are about 130 odd nations recognized the Palestinian state, and that didn't make any difference on the facts on the ground, or even to alleviate the suffering of people just getting some food in. Number two, it's most important to be within to make a difference. This is a card, you can only play it once. So it actually be done when it makes a difference within the two-state solution as we're moving forward. Thirdly, and most important, is actually to work with the United States of America, know how to stay with it. Fourthly, and that's a very, very important issue, not to appear to be rewarding terrorism, because Hamas and the Islamists and the extremist propaganda would present the terrorism of 7th October 2023 as actually a prime mover of the Palestinian issue, and without that, it would have never been recognition. So they must not be giving this card to play as a propaganda. So these are the elements that are being considered in the British position.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Rauf, with the EU securing a fresh trade deal with Trump, has post-Brexit Britain lost leverage in Washington? How is Starmer navigating this issue?
I don't think the Brits will ever, in my lifetime, lose leverage in Washington. We are their American cousins. We are two people divided by a common language, as George Bernard Shaw famously said. It would take a lot more than a trade fight at this point to damage the relationship. The American Revolution, the War of 1812, these were trade fights, and America prevailed in both cases. So I think that part of the issue is settled. they'll work it out. There's too much integration between the two economies for them not to work it out. In fact, there's too much economic integration in the English-speaking world for it not to all be worked out to the benefit of the participants in the conversation. Will it be easy? Will it be smooth? I don't know. But it will all be worked out.
Mr. Darwish, now some observers argue that the UK's recent measures like restoring UNRWA funding, imposing targeted sanctions on Israeli ministers and restricting arms licenses are largely just symbolic. Is this criticism fair, or are these steps laying the groundwork for a stronger British role in future diplomacy?
Well, a couple of issues actually. The trade between, on the military, between Israel and Kingdom is only about 20 million Kuwait, 20 million pounds. So it's not that much really. Secondly, when it comes to sanctioning, I mean, targeting the extremists within the Israeli government and with the settlers, movement leader settlers, are much more effective. And thirdly, you don't actually play all the sanction cards all at once. It has to be gradual. You have to keep something also up your sleeve in order to pressurize. But I think for the time being now, it's actually leaving President Trump as the man who can really put pressure on Netanyahu. There's more a chance from tomorrow, because the Knesset's last day of working, the Israeli parliament, is today. And once they are actually going to recess, then Netanyahu would have less pressure from the extreme right wing within his government for him not to make a deal. So at least Prime Minister Starmer, diplomats here, and President Trump are aware of that. And I think we should see probably more pressure on Israel in the next few days.
Mr. Roth, did Starmer manage to influence Trump on Ukraine policy, especially regarding military aid and ceasefire diplomacy, or was he simply reaffirming what Washington had already decided?
I think it's more the latter. I don't think that Trump president has much to say about Europe's policy towards Ukraine at this point. I think Trump, the president, believes that this is an issue between him and Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, and that together the three of them will resolve that. I do think that the president was impressed by the recent statements reaffirming the British and European commitment to NATO, the promise to increase defense spending. I think he received that as, see, I told them, I was right, they listened to me, and he's wondering why he's not getting more credit for being right. And that's how he looks at it. I don't think this is a case where when you say Europe, he means France and Germany. I think the Brits are very much in this conversation, but I don't think that conversation matters to him. I still think he thinks it's between him and Putin and Zelensky to settle this conflict.
Mr. Darwish, given the urgency of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, how likely is it that the meeting between Starmer and Trump could actually lead to immediate change on aid access, or at least ceasefire talks?
Well, I think the Britain sort of useful in its channel, the channel that historic for the last 300 years, Britain have with the Arabs and with the Gulf. Egypt has a good relationship with Britain, United States, and in France and Europe and so on. And as I said, I think it will be a crucial moment that Netanyahu can be convinced that since the Knesset is not sitting, there's no chance or little chance of the right-wing minister and his coalition pulling out and letting his coalition collapse. So it'll be at least a month or 6 weeks. I think the question now is something very interesting, as President Trump repeatedly said, I told them that when it comes to exchanging the hostages, Hamas will hold the last 10 or 20 because that's their human shields. And I think it's actually a big issue that Hamas actually presenting some kind of condition guarantees, which the Israeli public opinion cannot meet. Let's not forget, the Israeli government is an elected government. So there's this very limited what Netanyahu can do if public opinion is sort of urging him to make a deal to free the hostages.
Mr. Ruff, after months of mixed signals, Trump has now endorsed more aid to Ukraine and publicly distanced himself from Putin. Is this a true shift in strategy or a recalibration for international optics?
I think this is a strategic shift. I think that the president recognizes that the be nice to Putin approach wasn't working, that Putin holding all the cards doesn't give Trump much room to maneuver to create peace. And in order to produce a shift on Putin's part, that Zelensky's position is going to have to be strengthened.
Mr. Darwish, now Starmer faces increasing criticism from within the Labour and UK civil society over his handling of Gaza trade and transatlantic policy. Could this summit with Trump backfire politically at home?
Well, not necessarily. Actually, that's probably Prime Minister coming out quite good, apart from that little awkward moment about praising Farage. But in general, it's okay. The President Putin changing now the 50 days he gave to Putin, President Trump gave to Putin from ceasefire, he's only giving him now 10 or 12 days. So he's actually coming around to the view of Prime Minister Starmer on Russia. On trade, we still have a little problem with aluminium and steel. And I think the issue here probably of Labour's own making over climate change and making fuel too expensive. So part of the steel and aluminium that produced here because of the environmental policy is actually recycled. So part of it is made in China. And that is actually a sticking point on getting that trade deal with America. But and also another question which seemed to be quite good, although it's related more to Scotland, but it's Britain in general, about the tariffs on whiskey. I think President Trump was not actually aware there was a high tariffs on whiskey, and he's going to address that, he said. So all in all, quite a package there that presents Starmer as actually doing something good. And before that, with the agreement with India and speaking to Europeans. So that's, again, could be discussed on the cabinet meeting, that try to present it as one front and not let the left wing within the Labour Party spoil it because of Gaza. Now we're doing something about Gaza. I think that's probably my betting on what's going to go on in the cabinet meeting.
Okay. Mr. Darwish, I have one more question for you. Now, if Starmer fails to move Trump on Gaza, what options remain for the UK? Is Britain simply too constrained by its alliance with the United States, or can it still chart an independent course on the Palestinian question?
Well, the Palestinian question has been internationalized and globalized a long time ago. And it cannot be, Britain is no longer a mandate Palestine that can actually dictate to both sides what to do. That has actually been taken out of Britain. So Britain will actually have to work within the international community. But as I said, the lever is actually the good contacts and the long-term and history in the region. And I'm not quite sure, I'm not a fan of the current foreign policy team in the Starmer administration now.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much. I'd like to thank our guest today, Mr. Peter Ruff, contributing editor at the Newsweek. Thank you so much. And also Mr. Adel Darwish, UK parliamentary correspondent. Thank you both for your valuable insights. And now let's move to the United Nations high-level ministerial session on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's episode of In Depth. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.